So my name is Ziba Cranmer, and I'm the executive, not the executive director anymore. I used to be the executive director of an organization called Demand Abolition, which focused on addressing the demand for sex trafficking in the United States. I'm now the director of BU Spark, which is an initiative to support student innovation and experiential learning in technology fields, computer science and engineering here at BU. And we're based at the Hariri Institute. So before we get started, we have a really interesting group of folks that are, this panel is going to cover a pretty eclectic range of technology solutions to different aspects of the forced migration and human trafficking nexus, including sex trafficking, which is a subset of human trafficking. So I'm not going to get into all the details of what we're going to cover. I'm going to let the panelists introduce themselves. But first, what I want to just do is get a sense of who's in the audience. So we saw a group of students. Maybe we'll just start by, if you're a student, can you raise your hand? Great. And if you're a faculty or in the field of research, can you raise your hand? Terrific. And then if you're a practitioner, as in you're trying to come up with solutions to problems and implement them, to actually, get them implemented, please raise your hand. Okay. And then finally, if you have experience with using technology, whether in research or in implementation, raise your hand. Want to get it? Okay, raise them high. This is important. Okay, well, okay. And it seems like there's a lot of knowledge of that in the room, but I think as we go, I'm going to ask the speakers to use layman's language and explain. I think it'd be great to hear about the technology solutions and to maybe dig a little bit deeper into the terminology and the explanation of the technologies that you're going to be describing. So on the panel today, we have Hannah Thinyane, who is from the United Nations University Institute. They do research on behalf of UN agencies, I believe. And Peter Mansour, who's on my left, and he's from Microsoft, but he's not wearing his Microsoft hat today. That's very important. That's his competency, not his what he was representing. Mike McCarter as well. And this is all part of the story. Microsoft expertise, but not wearing that hat. And then at the end, we have Wesley, Wildman, and Khatera, Alizada. And they're representing the Center for Mind and Culture in Boston, which is a really interesting initiative that I've just learned about today. So what we're going to do is, I think we'll go down the list. Maybe we'll start with Hannah. And I'm going to have you guys speak for about 5 minutes about your initiative. And are there slides?
No, I don't have slides.
You don't have slides? Okay, that makes it easier. Okay. Okay, perfect. So yeah, if you have slides, you can go up. So we'll start with Hannah. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Hi, everyone. Just to say, so I'm from UNU, the United Nations University. You've probably never heard of us. No one ever has heard of us. We're one of the members of, or a body of the United Nations, and we do research on behalf of member states and UN bodies. So I'm from the Computing and Society Institute. So we look at the use of computing to help with development challenges. So I lead the Migrant Tech Research Group, which looks at how to use technology to enhance the agency of migrants, particularly migrant workers, in low-skill and semi-skill positions. So my research in particular, I wanted to focus on how frontline responders are enabled through technology to identify potential victims. I chose this area because if you look online or at any of the stats, and there are so many different figures for how many victims there are, but less than 1% of victims are identified. So that showed us that there's a problem with victim identification. I'm based in Macau, which you've probably never heard of that place either, but it's right next to Hong Kong. And we have some contacts in Thailand, and there's a well-known problem with trafficking in Thailand, so that's where my research is based. In April this year, we went to do a series of interviews and focus groups with frontline responders in Thailand. So by frontline responder, I mean NGOs, people like IOM, the government, the Department of Special Investigations Anti-Human Trafficking Center. I just call them DSI because it's a very long name. translators, and victims themselves to say what problems have you had yourself with victim identification, and how do people have, what technology do people have, and then how did they think they could use technology to solve those problems. So through this process, we identified a couple of different, I think there were 4 problems we found. Firstly, there's a communication problem. People don't speak the same language. Secondly, a skills or a training problem, that no one has an exact understanding of what human trafficking, forced labor, and labor exploitation is. Then thirdly, what they found was there's problems with trust. So trust in the system, so corruption, and trust from the NGO to the worker, are they telling the truth? And from the worker to the NGO as well, like what do they want to do with me? And so from this, we identified that if we had a mobile app that was on the frontline responder's phone, now this is the important part, then we could help them to identify victims by providing simple translations of simple lists of indicators of human trafficking. So these lists are sector-specific because sex trafficking looks very different to exploitation within fishing, which looks very different to forced begging, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we have this program that we're developing. I'm a computer scientist, so I've done the content management system, and we're doing the front end. You said not too technical, but explain it. So content management system, it's a PHP framework that I'm using called Laravel. And for the front end, we're using NativeScript, which allows us, like the Urban Refuge had, to have one code base for multiple clients. We're in the process of finishing our development and testing, and we're going to start our pilot in January with a group of NGOs. So I said before, it's important to note that the app is on the frontline responder's phone, because if you're, for example, on a fishing boat in the middle of the ocean, there's probably no network connectivity, firstly. And then if you're being really severely exploited, they've taken away your phone because they don't want you to call for help. So the only people who we could find who had technology were the frontline responders. So the idea is if I'm a frontline responder, I go, I'm on a boat. This might be a fishing exploitation. So I would select the fishing exploitation list from my phone, and I would hand my phone to the potential victim, who would then get the phone and put on a set of headphones and go through a list of flags to say what language do they speak. And we use tribal flags because, for example, in Myanmar alone, there are, I think, 300 different languages. And if you were not from the major tribe, which is the Burmese people, maybe the Rohingya, you've heard of those guys, or the Mon, or the Chang, or all of these, the Karen, they're not going to say they're Burmese. They would never select the Burmese flag. So you select your Burmese flag, and it gives you your translations of the questions in audio format. And you go through and answer very quickly, yes or no to the questions. Then there's a little bit of a calculation that goes on to say, what is your vulnerability factor? Are you very vulnerable or not? So using the ILO and the harder to see, harder to count methodology. And then the frontline responder is in front of you because they gave you the phone. So this just helps bridge that communication gap. So then if it seems that you're a victim or highly vulnerable, and you choose to want help and come with me, well, then I would take you using my normal channels. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think we're going to keep going down the line. So it's safe to say human trafficking and sex trafficking is the area that you're dealing with. And then we'll go to Peter, who's going to talk a little bit about sex trafficking.
Sure. So do you mind if I move over there? I have a couple of slides.
Yeah.
Cool.
Do we need to set it up or?
You're
good? Okay.
I'm just going to click it here. Cool. So, hello everyone. My name is Peter. I'm a software engineer at Microsoft. But as Ziba said, I don't have my Microsoft hat today, so I'm just here as Peter. And I'm here to talk to you about this project that we started a couple of years ago called Project Intercept. Initially, this started as there was a need in the community. Mike and Joe and Mike is in our project as well, so he can help answer questions on that. Mike and a few other people at Microsoft recognized the need from the community, and they partnered with one of the directors of NGOs that were fighting against sex trafficking. Ziba was one of the people involved, and she came to our original hackathon, and the idea started from there. We started building a solution to disrupt this trade, and from all aspects, and I'll dive into that in a minute. Since then, we've had a team of volunteers. I'm one of them. There's many of us, and it's a team that is constantly growing. And essentially, we've been building this solution to be owned by Seattle Against Slavery, with a lot of volunteers within Microsoft working on the solution. So let me jump into a little bit of the context of the problem that we're trying to solve. So I'm sure everyone here is to some extent or another familiar with sex trafficking. And if not, there are much better people that can explain it than me. But I just want to talk about how it works online. So since a lot of these transactions are moving online, how they work now is this. One way or another, so Zoe is a name that we give for the trafficking victim here. And one way or another, either the victim herself or the pimp would start out by putting up an ad on an online classifieds website like Backpage.com. And this ad would say something, describing the location and, what is near, stuff like that. Something obviously suggesting that this is a case to buy sex, and include a phone number in there. That's step one right there. The John, that's just a name for a buyer. I'm not sure if that's a correct term or not. This is an old slide. The buyers would go and read these lists and find the numbers of the victims of sex trafficking and start having text messages between both of them. That's step number 3 there, right? So this is the normal flow, and then they would decide on a time and a price and services and meet up and go from there. How we plug in here is we try and get into both sides of the equation here. So you can see that there's a supply side and a demand side. The supply side of this online trafficking is in the victims themselves, and the demand side is the buyers who are creating the market for this. And reducing one of these without reducing the other is going to be problematic, because as long as there's a market for it, then there's going to be victims that get coerced into these things, and as long as there's victims, they're still offering these services. So we tried to solve both of these sides. I think I should speak a little bit faster because I'm going to get the bell. So for the supply side, we have a flow called reach out, which attempts to reach out to the potential victims of sex trafficking. How this works is we have a crawler that goes on Backpage.com, Craigslist, things like that, automatically finds the numbers of all the potential victims that are there. It does all this magic to clear up all, if it's letters and numbers or a mix of them or whatever, it clears all that up and gets all the phone numbers, and then exposes it through a website that is built for advocates who work at nonprofits to help them reach out to the victims. So we discovered that there's already NGOs whose jobs are to just reach out to potential victims out there, and they need better ways to do it, but they couldn't scale to meet the amount of victims out there. So we have these crawlers that are running 24/7, collecting thousands, and actually I can show you a little bit about the scale here. We found 101,708 potential victims as of last night so far in a few months that we've been scraping this data. And there's a few numbers here of how many we've found in every city that we've been scraping so far on one website since March 2017. This is just one website, and this is so it's only a small part of the data. And these are unique numbers, by the way. So we have these crawlers running day and night, and they collect all this information, put it in a database, and then we offer a website that's simple for advocates to be able to log on, choose who they want to reach out to. There's a bunch of strategies that they can choose from, someone who's never been contacted before or someone who's been contacted and didn't answer. They can craft it however they like and reach out to them with one click, and then maintain conversations back and forth, keep case notes about each potential victim and things like that. And already, we've been piloting this with one NGO in Seattle. So far, that's why it's green. So far, they've had more than 10 times the amount of success that they've had in previous years. So I'm going to run through the rest. The other side is the buyer disruption. So in the buyer disruption, we have bots that pretend to be victims of sex trafficking or play the persona of a victim of sex trafficking, and we put up ads in these same places. And these bots are doing a pretty good job at that, and they're constantly improving. The main reason for that is it's a problem of scale. There's thousands of buyers versus few resources to be able to deal with them. So these bots, instead of arresting our way out of this, these bots attempt to have this conversation and then send a strong deterrence message to the buyers to try and educate them about the effects of sex trafficking and what this could do to them, and at the same time scare them by showing that actually we've collected your information. If we need to, this can be given to law enforcement, and then we can run all kinds of analytics on this data. We can cross-check it with repeat offenders or people on parole, things like that, and if possible, then law enforcement can get this data. It's extremely scalable and it's been successful and it's growing so far. So I'm just going to finish here. One thing I will mention before I finish is I've set up one bot so far in a test environment. If anyone wants to try it out, I have some cards here with the number of that bot, so you can come pick one up. Don't worry, your information is not going to be used to give to law enforcement. This is in a completely separate environment, separate databases, separate everything, and we all text this number with our phone number. So if you want to try it out, feel free to get this card, text it, and see it live. Any feedback, we would appreciate it. How can we increase our impact? What other resources exist that we can give to the victims or the buyers? Who else might be interested in this, and where can we find exploitation happening? Any of this information will be useful. So, thank you.
Peter, before you finish, do you have any numbers from the demand side just to show?
Yes.
I think it's helpful to show from a context perspective.
So I don't have numbers of how many buyers yet, but I have numbers of how many conversations that our bots. So far we've tried out our bots in 3 cities, 3 or 4, I think. And we've had almost 32,000 individual messages, which is, we've estimated if 10 seconds per message, about 88 hours of messages, and over 1,500 deterrence messages sent out in four bots so far.
How many ads have you placed on that one?
3 or 4.
3 or 4 ads has resulted in 31 and 1. So basically divide about 1,900 by 4 for the number of responses you get per ad, to give you a sense of the volume. Great, thank you. Okay. Now we're going to turn it over to Mike, who is going to talk about a different project that Microsoft, that he worked on as an employee at Microsoft.
Thanks, Ziba. Wow, that's loud. So as Ziba mentions, I am wearing 2 hats. I have one hat that's a Microsoft employee, and I'll wear that one today. Peter's wearing his Seattle Against Slavery volunteer hat. So for my Microsoft hat, I'll just tell you a little story about my own kind of career journey. About 5 years ago, I was starting to get, the feeling like it was the time to move on to a new employer. And I was starting to spruce up my resume, and we got a new CEO and a new vision and a new culture and some new tools. And our vision, by the way, is to help every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. I don't know how you get a better vision than that. So our CEO announced this all-company hackathon, which was called 1 Week, and everyone in that company gets to just, drop their pens and pencils and styluses and laptops and, go hack 24/7. And that was pretty cool. So I went and did that and took a few pet projects with me to that event, and actually turned one of those pet projects into a product, which you can still purchase. Actually, it's free today, called PhotoDNA Cloud Service. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit more about PhotoDNA Cloud Service, but I'll also say, in terms of my other part of the story, that every year I've done this all-company 1 week hackathon, and I've been inspired and energized by the passion and talent that people bring, and it really does add to their contributions in their day job. And so I've been hacking on projects that are in the human trafficking space, and that's how I got the privilege of meeting Ziba and Peter, and I'm continuing to work on that product as well. So PhotoDNA is, I'm sure Hannah's heard of it in her line of work, but it's essentially it's a fundamental tool for identifying child exploitation imagery. And, a little bit of history. we built this tool about 8 years ago, and we gave it away to Facebook, and we gave it away to Google and Twitter and a few others. And it became kind of the de facto standard for fuzzy matching or hashing of images. So, for instance, a bad guy, for lack of a better term, obtains an image one way or the other that's known to law enforcement to be a child exploitation image, a crime scene photo, if you will. If that image shows up on that individual's, computer, or if it shows up in an app or something that they're using, PhotoDNA allows the platform provider to identify that image and take action on it. So the problem that we had with PhotoDNA about 4 years ago is we were looking at the install base, and it was an on-prem product. We were looking at the install base and noticed that it was really just some of the big companies out there who were using it, and some of them have gone on to evolve their own sets of tools, but the smaller companies weren't using it as much. And so what we've done is made a API available where smaller companies can just sign up for PhotoDNA, send their photos to our API, and then get responses back as to whether that photo is a child exploitation image. And so PhotoDNA now has been scanning billions of images and has contributed millions of reports to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children annually, and very impactful. And I think when you look at those numbers, you don't realize that there's a real human element to that. One of the kind of defining moments for me when I knew I'd made the right decision staying at Microsoft and productizing PhotoDNA was when we got a report back that one of our customers had actually recovered a victim. It was, a PhotoDNA hit. The detective looked into it, went and arrested the bad guy, and the bad guy was about to exploit a young girl. And when you get those kinds of facts, it makes it all very clear that this is more than a numbers game. These are real lives. And I think that's what motivates every one of us on this panel. So that would be my kind of parting thought for folks in this room, is to just, we're gonna talk about a lot of tech and a lot of numbers, but just remember that those numbers represent real people.
Right. Thanks, Mike. Okay, so you guys are lucky because you're two, so you're going to get a little bit of extra time. So I think we've allocated you guys 10 minutes. And Wesley, you're going to start? Okay, great.
G'day, my name's Wesley Wildman. I'm from the Centre for Mind and Culture, which is located in Kenmore Square. The Centre for Mind and Culture was founded 10 and a bit years ago by BU faculty members. Its purpose is to reorganise expert faculty into problem-oriented groups so that we can actually solve problems instead of just eternally analyse them. And that makes us useful and a little bit angular. We don't quite fit into any university unit, but that's good. We work in a radical interdisciplinary way. We specialise in complex social problems. That means that we're looking at problems that are so complex that they defy understanding, that you require a couple of dozen disciplines to grasp what's going on, and that there are all kinds of unintended side effects whenever you intervene on them. We take migration and trafficking to be problems of that kind, extraordinarily complex problems. And we use computer modelling, we use big data analysis, we use whatever techniques are relevant to be able to give us some type of a handle on these very large problems. I thought it might be helpful just to show you a picture of a complex dynamical system. You see down there are simple systems at the bottom. They self-organise into larger complexes, and those larger complexes eventually yield emergent properties. So this is like human beings living together in a city, And before you know it, you've got pollution and you've got traffic and you've got beautiful shiny toasters and you've got bullies in school. There's a host of things that emerge from the complex social systems that we live in. Now, those complex systems involve many components that dynamically interact. There's different levels at which you can analyse things. So a doctor, medical doctor, would analyse things differently than a psychologist and differently than a sociologist and different than an economist and so forth. Different levels. And yet there are common behaviours in systems that allow you to have some kind of deep understanding of what the most efficient ways to analyse them might be. Now, we're quite interested in understanding these complex systems using complex systems. Each individual discipline that you could use gives you an angle on a complex system, but it doesn't tell you about the causation. But if you can recreate a virtual complex system that mimics the real-world complex system, then you've got a chance of tracing out the causal characteristics and thereby generating what we think of as solutions. That is, how can you intervene in a causal nexus in order to get an outcome that you want? So this takes us straight to this wonderful problem about computer simulation. It's how to connect it to real-world data. You have a real system and you make a model of it. That gives you a model system, and model systems are always approximations to the real thing. In the real system, you can perform experiments and you get results. And if you have a model system, you can perform virtual experiments, not real-world ones, but virtual ones that produce results. And you compare the real-world results with the model results. And that enables you to refine the theory that lies behind your model and to create more accurate theoretically based predictions. Okay, that's intended as background to lead to the following point. Pause. We think one of the deep problems associated with trafficking and immigration is that people are guessing about policies. They're trying policies out. Often in a policy debate, it's the seasoned veteran policymaker whose voice wins the day. The young bucks with really clever ideas hardly get a look in. Their policies aren't being evaluated. What we're trying to do is to create a virtual system where you can experiment with policies that affect complex social systems such as the sort we're talking about in this conference. And what does that mean concretely? That you would be able to build a virtual model of, say, we're being funded at the moment by the Norwegian government to apply this technology to their immigration situation. So we build a model of a city such as Oslo in Norway, and we try and calibrate that model to the real world facts having to do with which policies are being implemented, how refugees are settled, that is, what's the distribution pattern of their settlement and so forth. What you wind up with then is a virtual system that you keep working on until it behaves the same way as the real world system within limits. Now that's a playground for a policy analyst, right? You can now toss in a new policy, see what's going to happen, change the way you distribute. Oslo has this famous problem of Pakistani immigrants from 2 generations ago who have now produced very complex, very painful situations with gangs and so forth. And well, what if they hadn't put them there? What if they distributed them in clusters instead of put them all together in one place? Would that have made a difference? Someone could say, yes, it would. But how do you know? You have to test the policy. Now, the great thing is you can validate these models against the past because we've got good longitudinal data for some countries, and then you can project new models that could be used for the future. And the aim, once again, is to transform policy debate, to transform it in the direction of correctability, a kind of democratisation so that it's not just the loud voices that win all the time, and in the direction of efficacy, so that we can make better, cost-effective decisions about policies for the sake of mitigating the problems associated with trafficking and immigration. My colleague, Khatera.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Khatera Alizada. I'm working at the Center for Mind and Culture. So I would like to explain or present to you the roadmap to the trafficking project that we are having at the Center for Mind Culture. So in order to build a virtual system of trafficking that mimics the real world, it is important to factor in each of the variables that are relevant. So for that reason, we have, in the first step of building this computation model, we identify our inputs. So in order to examine how existing policies or policy proposals will impact or disrupt the human trafficking problem. So our first input is like making sure that our model includes all the policies, and then we also look at the types of trafficking. So the types of trafficking is important because in each different types, the traffickers use different forms of tactics and strategies for recruitment and control of the victim. And Polaris identified 25 types. In our model, we are interested in the sex trafficking, focusing on the children. So those will be our types. And then the perpetrator and the victim characterization, and also the environment in which they evolve and their relationship. So this kind of modeling gives us the how the interactions occur and how the policies are addressing those interactions. And then the interaction rules that we are considering are that the traffickers are a rational human being, and they make a cost and effect analysis before they make any decision. So our model, a computational model, will be able to capture this decision-making process, unlike the other ways of statistical analysis, which are unable to show us how in the system decision-making is occurring. So our model will show that these strategies of the decision-making, and doing the first part of this is building the building blocks of the model, and the solution that we had, the policy solution that so far we have reached are that the existing policies of the three paradigm based on the United Nations framework are not, there aren't sufficient policies existing to address the supply and the demand side of the problem. Because the availability of the supply of the victim and the market to observe are some of the crucial factors in the decision making of the traffickers. Mostly we have the 3P policies that are focused on the prevention, protection of the victims, and the prosecution of the perpetrator. Within this 3P paradigm, we don't see the potential victim outreach. We only see that the policies are focusing on the media campaigns, but that is insufficient because the decision making of the traffickers are okay. So the decision making of the traffickers are based on that. So in any policy that will be efficient, will be considering these three factors: the supply side, the demand side, and the prosecution side.
Great, thank you. Did you have any other?
Just show the rest of the slide.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you can take another minute to maybe wrap up.
Okay, so this is our roadmap. We have all the inputs, and then after that we will be running the simulation, which is the execution of the model, and then we will have the outputs and the analysis. So in our outputs, we are looking for the number of children being trafficked, and also in the policy cost and effectiveness. And then we are doing the analysis. So we are in the initial phase of building this model. We are seeking the collaboration and advice and suggestions on how the existing databases, and also the making sure that we are including the right policy options in our model. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to ask a few questions just to get started, and then in about 5-10 minutes, turn it to the audience. So if you have questions, start thinking about them, and we'll get to you in a few minutes. So one of the things that's interesting to me about all of your projects is that you're either in you're all pretty much, you guys are in large institutions, you're working with large institutions like government, and you're using technology. What I'm curious about is, how do the problems come to you? How do you decide on the problems you're going to solve? What does that process look like? And how do you decide which ones you're going to tackle? Because obviously there's tons that you could tackle. So I'm just curious about almost the filtering process and the prioritization process. And is that serendipity? Is that deliberate? What does that look like? And I'll throw it open, and whoever has an urgent response, we can start with you.
Could I begin?
Yep.
For me, the reason I'm interested in this topic is because my family has been directly involved with it. One of my brothers was an Aboriginal boy who was stolen from his family at age 2 and force migrated, and my family adopted him, and so we grew up with this Aboriginal boy, but I only discovered that he was force trafficked away from his original family a few years ago, and I was, I don't know, it's difficult to convey how angry and frustrated I felt, and since then I've been looking for an opportunity to try and do something about this in some area. And the problem for us is that you're looking for little tractable bite-sized pieces, and this is the child sex trafficking thing and the funding thing with the Norwegian government came along, so we're pushing where we can push, but driven by deep frustration and pain over what we've seen.
So for you, it was really the partner, the Norwegian government, that came and said, we want to try this model, but this is where we want to apply it, so we're going to apply it to child sex trafficking?
No, for the Norwegian government, the issue is how to settle immigrants and help them integrate into Norwegian society.
Okay.
But the same type of technique that we use for that model, we found we can also use for child sex trafficking.
Okay, interesting. I'd be interested for UN University. I mean, you're serving the whole UN. How do you decide where to start? What issues are you tackling? What's the process of making decisions around that?
So I started with a bit of a stakeholder analysis to say, what are people doing in this area? Because I didn't want to do what everyone was doing. And so I was Skyping 3 people a day for 2 months, just trying to figure out who are the big players and where are the gaps. And so from there, we undertook our April research trip. So we had, in the stakeholder analysis, understood who's doing what in Greater Mekong sub-region, which is kind of like Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Myanmar area. And we started interviewing NGOs, IOM, some some trafficking victims, which was really, really interesting, just to see what problems they had. And in the process, we met the Thai government, and I thought I was a bit like standoffishy because I thought maybe they're corrupt themselves. But I went to talk to one of the guys, and he was like, you know, I have this dream of creating an app, and I want to do this and this and this. And it was my whole spiel that I had used with everyone for that whole week. And I was like, wait, who have you been talking to? And he's like, no, that's what I want to do as well. And it was just that kind of alignment. And it's like, okay, well, I needed someone in the government anyway, and this guy wants to do what I want to do, and he's not a computer scientist, so can't do it himself, so let's do this thing.
So just to recap, you did stakeholder analysis of your clients in the UN agencies.
So I talked to 32 different participants from, I think there were 17 different groups. So most NGOs, some local NGOs, some specific to different types of trafficking. So in Samantakun, it was lots of fishing trafficking, and in Pattaya, a lot of sex trafficking and child pedophilia and child.
So you validated the problem because you kept hearing it, and then you found someone to pilot it with, and then you said, okay.
And then you see from all of the white papers and the documentation online and all that stuff that the US State Department say, oh, guess what? When doing these interviews, the groups who come along, they ask the captains to be the translators. So the potential exploiter is being the translator for the victim. It's just ridiculous. And then you talk to the Royal Navy, the Royal Thai Navy, and they say, oh, we interviewed 10,000 people, and we didn't find any trafficking victims because we don't know what one looks like. And it's like, hey, I think I have something to help you out.
Great. And then private sector, hackathons. I mean, when I went to the Hack for Good that week, there were thousands of projects. So what gets in? How does that process look? And then what gets productized? I mean, that's a whole nother level.
I can get started if you want, Peter, and then I'll let you chime in. So in my view, it's a little bit of art and a little bit of science. I think there's this sort of common theme among so many of us that we want our jobs to be more than just about the bottom line. We want them to be about people and helping people. So I'd say within that, where can you have the most impact, and where are you passionate about? Where does that align with your gifts and talents? And once you figure that out, then you kind of know the space you're going to go after. And then that's where it starts to get kind of science-y. When you know the space you're going to go after, you look at what's the problem and what's the ideal state. Once you have that, you look at what are the barriers that prevent you from reaching that ideal state. And then you go into what are the root causes of those barriers. And then from there, you can get to what kinds of solutions would address those root causes. And now you got a set of solutions. That's where, you just do some back of napkin estimating to say, is it high effort? Is it medium effort? Is it low effort? Is it high impact? Is it medium impact? Is it low impact? And when you plot those answers on a 2x2, you end up with the quadrant that you don't want to touch, which is things that are low impact and high effort. And you end up with sort of that sweet spot, which is things that are kind of easy, quick wins, but can have an impact. And sometimes those aren't the sexiest, most complicated projects. Sometimes they're little things. But that's what I like to go after first.
And that happens at what stage? At the point when you're evaluating what projects to accept into the hackathon, or once you've dug in?
Yeah, so for instance, with Project Intercept, I think one guy in the audience there, Val Ritchie, probably remembers this, but we were looking at a whole bunch of different ideas, and they were some great ideas, but we applied that kind of decision-making process to pick the idea that ultimately became Project Intercept.
And to be clear, I think the gap between the question is that, this was the thought process to start this project and to put it in the hackathon. But then once it's in the hackathon, it was open to all Microsoft employees, and then each individual person can actually have a different selection process. Depends on, they have thousands of these projects, and they can, search through them and stuff like that. Some people might have wanted the you know, for example, for me, I'd heard about sex trafficking and how it's happening locally a few months before that, and I wanted to help somehow. But you know, when I'd look up online, it'd be like, you know, oh, come stand at this bench for, you know, like an hour on this night and stuff like that. I'm like, that's cool. You know, it's great to be able to help, but I wish I could use, you know, the skills that, you know, the skills that I'm using for my professional life instead of just to make Microsoft more money, but to also, you know, do something that makes an impact. So, and I think a lot of people went through that. Mike mentioned it, and I know a few other people who've joined the project were for very similar reasons. So, yeah, Mike had a methodical process for like suggesting the project and stuff like that, and you know, putting it on the tool and putting it available for others to join. But I think once it's available as well, the environment at Microsoft was, at least for this week, you know, you can search for projects, find something that you're passionate about. And
Cool.
Can I chime in on the product question? Because I think that's actually a really important point. You know, there's things that you might want to become a product, but that doesn't mean they'll be a successful product. You have to figure out what the business model would be that would make it a sustainable product that's going to outlast you when you move on to the next thing. What's going to keep that going? And so, you know, there are lots of business models out there that work, but you got to pick one, and you got to pick the right one for the thing you're building, or else you'll end up with a great idea, a great demo. You may win a hackathon, but a year from now, 2 years from now, the thing that you built is gone, dust. So how do you build something lasting? And you know, there's tricks to doing that as well. But I'm a big fan of the social enterprise model, where I call it a benevolent flywheel. The product itself is financially viable, and therefore can perpetually continue if it has the right ingredients in place.
Great, thanks. So we have about 15 minutes.
We actually started 15 minutes.
Oh, okay.
There's a 15-minute buffer.
Okay.
So you can go to the bell.
So the bell, we shouldn't really listen to the bell anymore. So I'm going to open it up. Do we have microphones for the audience? Is that okay? So if there's any questions, yeah, why don't we start here? And
Don't start talking till you have the mic because of the audio of the recording. So if you want to talk, people can come up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Madalina Rogoz. I'm coming from Vienna, from Austria, from the International Center for Migration Policy Development. And actually, I have a question on this slide. In terms of inputs, what do you take in account on policy measures? What are the elements of a policy measures that you consider? Because here, then you would have all sorts of policies, from welfare state, from migration policies, from everything counts. So what do you take into consideration? Thank you very much.
Sure. So in terms of policies, we make sure our model is specific to each country. So we can be able to collaborate for a specific country, for example, the United States. And then we will look at the existing policies within that country. But the general framework is to look at the 3P policies that are the UN based on the UN protocol, the policies of prosecution and in the protection of the victims and prevention policies. So basically, within the prosecution policies, we're just focusing on whether the policy of no punishment for the victims, but we are not looking at the recovery and rehabilitation because our model stops before the rehabilitation occurs. So in general framework, our policies are based on the UN protocol requirements of these policies.
We actually have 2 more questions here.
Okay, great.
Hi, my name is Allison Hawkins. I'm from the Boston Consortium for Arab Region Studies, and my question is for Peter. I understood and appreciated the buyer side of your technology, where you're, sending deterrence messages and reaching out to potential buyers. But I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about how the technology does outreach to potential victims, because I'm thinking, I don't know how it works, but in my mind, if those messages are in any way monitored by people, who are abusing those potential victims, to me, that could be a potential risk. So I was just wondering if you could speak more to that.
That's a great question, actually. This is one of the first questions that came up when we were first brainstorming, and it keeps coming up, actually. It even came up today in another discussion. That is a great question. So first off, I'll address how does it work with the victim outreach. And essentially, it works like this. You have these classified websites with these numbers offline. We're going and we're collecting these numbers, right? And I guess the point, let's say I'm an advocate and I work at a nonprofit that specializes in reaching out to victims. I go to work that day, open up my computer, log into this website, and say, today, I have a shift. I'm going to go and I'm going to reach out to people with the following strategy, with this many people. Type in a personalized message. They found this to be much more effective, especially when the advocate is a potential, previous survivor, or current survivor of, you know what I mean, of trafficking. They craft a personal message such as, hello, my name is so-and-so. I was in the life before. If you'd like to get out, and I got out, there's community and support available. Let me know if you want to have coffee or something like that. Send a message. This goes out to 100 people, and then anyone who responds back, they can maintain the conversations in something that looks like a chat website, kind of like Facebook Messenger or WhatsApp Web or something like that. So that's the first question, how does it work? The second interesting question about what if the traffickers actually see these messages? So first of all, when we first brainstormed this with the NGOs who were kind of the stakeholders and the ones with expertise in this field, one of the first responses that we found out was that good if the traffickers see it. Not good, obviously, not meaning that there's harm to the victims or anything, but it's good to have the traffickers know that there's somebody who cares about the victims. And that they're not alone, and that they don't have full reign in this field. So there are people out there who are caring and who are reaching out to those victims, and the traffickers need to be careful and watch their back. Right? So that's the first point. The second point about harm to the victims, what we were told based on these conversations with the NGOs is that. So first off, most of the victims do their own text messaging and have their own phones, and they're in charge of that. But there are a select few where the trafficker has the phone and sees the text messages. And even in those cases, we were told that they will probably just ignore it, or especially if there's no back and forth or something like that they would just ignore it. In the cases where a victim does feel threatened and they do, respond to the message and they have back and forth and stuff like that. If they feel threatened and they want to get out straight away, they can talk to the advocate and request services straight away. Or otherwise, if they're worried that the pimp can read it, perhaps they can delete the number, delete the messages and stuff like that. Mike or Ziba, does anyone want to add anything?
No.
We have one more question.
Hello, my name is Amira Mohammed. I work with Alison at also BCARS. It seems that we ask the same questions, because my question again for probably Peter and Mike and also Hannah on the identification of potential victims. When I did my work in the practitioner field with IOM, a potential victim was an identified victim. So a potential is identification. It's a label that is given to someone who has been already done the screening with IOM, as you're probably aware of, and then he was identified or she was identified as potential. But then there are groups who are at high risk. So probably maybe what you mean, I don't know, I mean, I want to learn about that more from you. So my question basically is, how can you reach out to victims or potential victims of trafficking? And where is the thin line in sexual trafficking here in your case between prostitution or commercial sex work and sexual trafficking? Thank you.
Great question. I can take a stab at that first, and then I'd love to hear from everyone else. the important part to note in the kind of outreach that we're doing here is that it's completely voluntary. So let's say, the fact is, from just a phone number, we can't tell what's someone being trafficked versus someone doing this willingly. Although, as you said, the line can sometimes be very thin because, somebody who feels completely powerless and that they can't do anything else, even if they're doing it willingly based on that thought that they're powerless and can't do anything else, where is the line drawn? But so we can't tell that. So the only thing we do is we offer help, and if somebody would like to accept that help, then they respond and they're connected with resources and advocates and things like that.
Thanks, Peter. I would just add the distinguishing between potential victim and victim. There are efforts out there to identify actual victims. Thorn is an NGO that has a project called Child Finder Service, which was also a hackathon 3 years ago. And they're the NGO that's taken ownership of that product. And they're essentially taking the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children victim images and matching those against the images of girls and boys who are being trafficked or being advertised for sex. And then obviously where there are matches, those indicate trafficking situations. But then for the other categories, we don't know who's an actual trafficking victim and who's a sex worker. So we just kind of have to take a shotgun approach. Hannah, anything to add?
Yeah. I can speak from the Thailand context. So in Thailand, they have 2 real phases of identification, and the initial one is what we're interested in. So the initial screening, which is often out in the field, and then the full screening is it's 9 pages, 200 questions. It's ridiculous. But so the initial screening is what we want to help them with. So that's either if it's an NGO, a social worker, or a translator, they're the ones who go in the multidisciplinary teams on raid and rescues. And if it's a local inspector, so the police, they're allowed to stop a boat, for example, and talk to people. Department of Fisheries as well. They can get on a boat and the captain must allow them to talk to people on the boat and, in theory, talk in private, but it's not ever in private. So it's kind of different with the different actors because some, the policeman has more authority than the others. One of the important questions for us in each of our lists for each of the different types of trafficking is, do you want help now? And so that is our big red flag on our vulnerability thing. Does the person want to leave? Because just because I might not want to be in the situation myself, it doesn't mean that they don't want to be there. So one of the groups that we talked to, they said that on the other hand, trauma and traumatic experiences are traumatizing, and you don't actually know the situation you're in. And the simple list of questions, which are very kind of down to earth, and they're very simple language and said by a caring voice, it's enough to make you realize right now, this is what the situation I'm in, and I can have help. We're also doing a second part of the investigation would be to say, if a raid and rescue goes along and people say, oh, okay, it says I'm vulnerable, but I want to stay, it might be interesting a couple of days later for the NGOs to go back and do a second interview with people if they want to, which gives them a chance to really reflect on their situation, especially if others have decided to leave and they've decided to stay. To decide if they want to still stay.
So for us, the potential victim within our model will be, we are looking at the traffickers' perspective, how they are targeting the potential victims. So they are making a rational decision who to target. And for the child sex trafficking, they will be the at-risk children who are the targets of the trafficker mainly. For example, the runaway children, the homeless and street children, and the children who have been abused or who have been forced into trafficking or prostitution by their families. So that is how we are deciding on our potential victims within our model.
Maybe building on that question, because technology can be a blunt instrument sometimes, right? It's really the process surrounding the design and the use of the technology that makes sure it does what it intends to do. So in this case, it's interesting because it's a market and it may have multiple, just like you have lots of different drinks that are marketing to different people, you can still find the people that want the water. How do you build in thinking through, or how have you, what has your experience has been, unintended consequences? What's the kind of process that you go by to proactively think about those and where they may come up while you're kind of excited in solving the solution that you had your eyes set on? And I'll leave it, I'll open it up to all of you guys.
We've had 3 rounds of focus groups with different actors in the fields to say, so this is our idea, what do you reckon? Because they have more experience than we do. And so they're the ones who, for example, we never thought of having to make specific lists for people under 18. But they said, well, obviously, if they're under 18, human trafficking, it's forced labor, if they're even just working. It's child labor, sorry, and then it could be forced labor as the other part. And so we're like, okay, now we need a special list for under 18s. And then we went to Pattaya and we had a working group with some people there who are it's where, I don't know if you know Thailand or the stuff that goes on there. It's where there's lots of sex trafficking and child pedophilia and forced begging. And so they're like, you can't just have one list for kids. You need to have one for kids who are forced to beg and one for kids who are forced into pedophilia. And it's like, okay, now we have to have another list. So it's kind of just talking to the people whose day-to-day job it is.
I imagine in hackathons, it's a bit harder, right? You have a week, if you're lucky enough to continue the project, but somebody could take that spark and take it and run with it, and all of a sudden, I don't know, what have your experiences been with that?
Yeah, I think you get lots of buckets of cold water thrown on things, and I think you just have to invite that and kind of look for it. Try to break the thing that you're so excited about and celebrate when you do, because you've just saved a lot of wasted time and energy, and you've still gotten a lot of learnings. So we've had a few of those sort of false starts, and I would agree with Hannah, though. It's not enough to just try to do that within your kind of insular little community. You've got to invite experts. Survivors in this space are really insightful, and if you're building a solution and you're not getting perspectives from the victims themselves who've survived and gotten out and have gotten some objectivity from being out of the space for a while, then you probably are misguided and perhaps building something that isn't going to be all that effective over the long run.
Right. How much time do we have? Okay, great.
Yes.
In the back.
Hi, I'm Olivier Peru. I'm a sociologist, and I work on different groups which are using children, for instance, from Romania and Bulgaria in different Western countries. And what we observe now is those criminal networks. For instance, they are using children in France for forced criminality, and the same children can be moved after in Spain for sexual exploitation. And so most of the time they are really trafficking, when we try to protect them after 6 months, they are moving in another country with another form of trafficking. And do you think, is it possible to make some simulation about the consequences on the other countries if one have one sort of policies And yes, and also with the form of trafficking too.
It is possible to do that in principle, but you've described one of the reasons why these are incredibly complex systems. The intricate networks that connect countries with each other, they're tied up with trade routes, with drug trafficking, with criminal trading. Yeah, it is so complicated. So the networks that you need to establish inter-country things, it's possible in principle to use them once you know what they are, if you've got data on them, to use them. We use them in some other projects, like trying to predict hidden ways that nuclear materials or other weapons of mass destruction might get in the hands of ISIS or other religious extremist groups. So we do know about some of those networks, but it's just extremely. These models are data hungry. If you don't have good data, then you kind of almost stopped from getting anywhere with them. And these networks are some of the darkest aspects of this whole story. So it's very difficult to get moving very far. It's easier to deal with countries where people are collecting data, sharing data. There's a ton of countries where even that's not happening.
Can I ask a question? I want to ask, where do you get your data from? Because, say, just in the Thailand instance, it's disgusting all the stuff people do. Say, Thailand, Pattaya, the kids there, all the networks and all of that stuff. How do you find you got to have a lot of information.
Yeah. The trick is to humbly acknowledge that there's some countries we can't really deal with because the data's just not there. Like you can have a fantasy model that's supposed to describe something, but if it's not calibrated to actual data, then it's not useful for testing policies. So we're limited pretty much to situations where there is good data collection. So part of what we try and do in the centre is to create data collection mechanisms so that we can then make the data useful for evaluating strategic moves that people can make. There's something else we do as well. We actually pay attention to victim stories. The agents in our agent-based models are intelligent agents, so you can have conversations with them. You can talk to them about their story and they can relate their timeline to you. You can ask about their reasons for doing what they did and you can do the same thing with traffickers. So we're trying to build in a kind of sensitivity to individual stories at the qualitative level, which is another type of fidelity. But once again, you need the stories and you need the tech to be able to pull it off.
So maybe I just want to ask one more question, and then I'll bring it to the audience, which is, what recommendations, I mean, a lot of you guys, I feel like, are on the cutting edge, and you're working with other sectors. So do you have recommendations for folks that are from the non-technology sector? You know, I don't know if the Norwegian government is a high competency or the partners you're working with, Hannah, or you guys. What are the recommendations that you would have for these types of technical, non-technical partnerships that you think would make a big difference in terms of accelerating the use of technology and therefore the scale of impact?
In one sentence, please collect data and share data. For us.
Yeah.
For me, I would say whatever you're doing, make sure you base it on the current access and use of technology of the people you want to use it, because you could have a beautiful solution, but then, I don't remember who mentioned it, maybe you guys, you have a beautiful app and nobody has apps. They just have like a cheap Nokia phone. So you need to base it on.
And how do you do that?
Sorry?
How do you do that?
Go and ask them.
So get out into the field.
I think we're just scratching the surface on kind of the interdisciplinary solution building, and I was just having a conversation on the walk over here about the fact that, you know, trafficking is so public and so visible and so egregious that and fairly new. You know, we want to do something about it, and we can, because it's visible and we can see the results of our actions. But even something as innovative as Project Intercept, disrupting the supply and the demand of this business, is kind of restricted by. I mean, the reason it's only rolled out on the reach out side, the victim reach out side, the reason it's only rolled out in Seattle is because Seattle's the only market that we're aware of that has reputable services and a place to stay for victims who are pulled out of the life. We would roll it out in all those other markets if we had NGOs in those markets with, you know, really reliable, effective services to offer to the victims. So I think it's not just a technology problem, it's also those, you know, social services and policy services and, the, you know, having the data science underneath the technology be working right. And I think getting all those to work together is something that'll probably need to start in academia, because it's the only place where you have all the different disciplines located within a pretty close radius.
So what you're saying, that's the unintended consequences, is really looking at the whole flow and making sure you're not just doing part of it, but you're understanding where it then outputs.
Yeah.
I think Boston could be a good market, though. Well, there was one more question. Does that person have a microphone? Okay.
Yes.
Oh, Val.
Hi, I'm Val Ritchie. I'm a prosecutor in Seattle. And there's a pretty robust national discussion right now about seizing and shutting down websites that facilitate sexual exploitation. And for example, Congress is spending a lot of time on Backpage.com right now. Wesley, I loved your presentation. I'm curious whether your modeling could be used to assess migration in the event that a particular platform is closed, where people will go next. I like to think 2 or 3 chess moves ahead and how we might get ahead of that game. It's not migration in the way that we normally think about it across borders, it's migration online. And I'm wondering if you could speak to whether that's a thing that you guys could even measure or anticipate.
Yeah, it's a great question. I would think you'd want to be talking to Google about that. The sorts of data that you need to make projections of that kind have to be based on past patterns. There's a certain amount that you can do based on characterising a perpetrator, seeing what their interests are, and then ranking sites that have those interest characteristics so that you can make sort of score sites for where they might go next. But they still have to know about those sites to go there, and it's just a tremendous amount of uncertainty. If you actually see what happens, like the shutting down of the white supremacist websites were a lot more effective than just blocking people's accounts, right? They found that out. And the shutting down can actually really quieten down across the whole web. It can quieten down a particular type of noise across the whole web. The people best suited to do that are the people with the best grasp on what's happening worldwide.
Could I just add one point to that, Wes? So when I was doing the PhotoDNA project, I got some coaching and mentoring from a guy named Ernie Allen, who's just legendary in the child protection space. He started the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and he told me that in the 1990s, they found that there were, you know, adult sites that were selling pedophilia material to people who were just buying it with a credit card. And so they figured that out, and they got together with all the card networks, and they shut down those merchant accounts, and that whole business went dark and went away, and they all celebrated and declared victory. But what they'd really done was, you know, they'd sort of stalled it for a while, and then it all drove underground. So I think Peter and I were just chatting as well about Val's idea, like, how do we take your model and predict what happens when Backpage shuts down? And I think that might be a good next project.
Great. How are we on time?
Good. May I ask one more question?
Yes, go ahead.
I get to, because I grabbed the mic. So I'm Kaya Schilde again from Boston University, and I just wanted to, I was noting the the brilliance of the entire panel, because we're talking about these rare projects that are basically scratching the surface. They're interdisciplinary. We're just starting, and the connection between these things. And your conversation started to go there, the degree to which you could actually model some of the interventions. I mean, I know a computational model is a complex thought experiment where you can hold everything constant. You could just increase the number of people or something, or you could change the policy intervention. And so I just wanted to know, kind of from both sides, very briefly, whether or not you think you could model a policy intervention of the level of granularity of PhotoDNA or intercept. And then on the other end, the question about innovation and product design is not just about unintended consequences, but it's about impact analysis. Trying to scratch around in the dark about what your impact actually is and whether or not a thought experiment that's computational could assist with that.
Yeah.
And then we'll. Okay.
So on that, I do think it's possible to model granular policies, but the problem there, it becomes computational quickly. The more granular the policy, the vaster the number of agents you need. I mean, we use gigantic computers and computing clusters to do what we do at the moment, but if you want to model a super granular policy of some kind, like matching hotel room pictures against pictures that, you'd have to find a way to abstract from it to make it computationally tractable. And you'd pay a price for the abstraction, but if the abstraction's intelligent, if you make a good decision about what to abstract, you might still get something useful. It's a kind of yes-no answer at the moment, but the nature of the answer changes with technology every year.
And I can comment on something on how we test our strategy so far. For the bots, we have a few ideas on testing. The very obvious metric is, so we know the buyers by their phone numbers. How many buyer phone numbers that we've already given a deterrence message to do we see again? Right? That's a very obvious metric. There are other ones that we can measure. For example, one trend that we've noticed in the last year is that the volume of ads and unique potential victims that's gathered from Backpage month after month is decreasing. Again, we don't know why. I'm not sure. I don't know if it's due to our project. Probably not, but not at this stage at least. It's still in pilot, but that's one trend that's worth monitoring. Another thing is that we looked at the number of cases, for example, for the NGO that we've been piloting with for Reach Out, and they told us that the number of people that they've had successful interactions with and who've registered for service has increased by 10 times in the year since they've been piloting our software. So that's another metric, things like that. If anyone can think of metrics, actually, we'd love to hear them. But there's a lot of possible ways to think about metrics for evaluating.
I think those are great, and I would add on the kind of macroeconomic side of things, when we see the price for sex services drop, that's an indication that demand has dropped, because even in situations where there's an increase in demand, like a big sporting event or something like that, the price tends to stay pretty constant, which tells us that victims are sort of mobile and entering an area to take advantage of the increased market size. So if we can start to see drops in obviously transaction volume, but also the proxy would be if we could see drops in the price, then we know that we're significantly affecting demand. And I think measuring and modeling that would be a really exciting place to go, and I just don't think we're there yet.
I've got one to add. I was just going to say something about my project, but then I was going to ask something. You were saying the price would go down. I know that in Thailand, when you see the price go down, it also shows the person is just a bit more desperate. So there are some people who will just, because they're so desperate, they'll perform whatever sex act just so that they can have a place to sleep, lying down, and have a shower. And so I wonder how desperation feeds into that. But maybe let me let you answer that.
Yeah, no, I was just going to comment. I was going to agree with you. I think, we've seen like the this is kind of sad, but the margins are better on kids because kids just want love and a place to live, whereas adults expect some, portion of the services. So I think that, you would think that the increased risk from, penalties would drive traffickers to, stick with trafficking adults. But I think the dollar kind of wins over there, and kids get victimized for that reason. They have sort of these basic needs that aren't necessarily monetary, so the traffickers can make more money off of them.
Yeah.
I guess we're gonna wrap up. So thank you very much, and I guess reconvene in
5-minute break.
a 5-minute break, and then we'll see you again here. Thank you. Thank you to our panelists. Oh yeah, and please come down, and or you can take the phone number, which is 617-996-8765.